Hi, I want to do a video today on satisfaction and something that I think I've labeled as the retrospective desire, and all our desires are irrelevant, and why it's all about the satisfaction that we're trying to derive from these desires, and how these desires that most of us are trying to satisfy are completely inefficient, and how they're very unproductive and useless in a way, especially by the standards of which we're living by in this this modern day that we're living in. So I would say most of our satisfactions are very trivial. All we're doing is eating long enough to eat again. We get hungry to satisfy our hunger, to live long enough to get hungry again, so that in the meantime, possibly, we can satisfy our libido, which is subconsciously trying to get us to reproduce. All of our subconscious desires are irrelevant, especially once we've recognized what the subconscious naturalistic forces are trying to make us do. And that is, they're trying to make us reproduce and survive long enough to do that. So we eat long enough, we hydrate long enough so that we can reproduce, and by evolution standards, once we've reproduced, while it might want to get as many licks out of us as possible, we're completely useless. So once we've satisfied evolution's desire, or evolution's standard, or evolution's standard of our meaning and surviving in this world, once we've satisfied that, we're almost completely disposable. Once there's a next generation to take the place of the current generation, we do it, and then that generation does the exact same thing, only to have this repetitive cycle happen over and over again, only doing the same thing and not changing. And that's the game we're playing. We're completely going in a circle. We're satisfying desires long enough to reproduce, and that's it. So the point with the desire thing is your desires are only relevant. Whatever tensions you have, whatever libido you may have, whatever hunger you may have for whatever food or for whatever beverage that you have, is only relevant before you satisfy your desire. And I would say that once you've satisfied this desire, it's completely irrelevant how you've gotten to that desire. So in a way, you can live your life completely fulfilled, especially when in circumstances where you don't necessarily have the means to get what you want. You almost have to get used to the idea of just living by and satisfying. And in a way, it helps you get used to these things, such as just living on a bowl of rice a day, or living on just water every day. You don't need all these complicated ways of satisfying your desires. You don't need a chocolate milkshake with a banana in it. You don't need any of this stuff. You don't need cookies. You don't need any of these things to satisfy whatever hunger you have, because all we are is a tube. We're a digestive system, and we're sexual organs, and our legs and our arms are means of getting us to those things, to satisfy those things. Sort of like you can live off a bowl of rice, or rice cakes, or you can just live off of water, and you can live off of just self-satisfying your own libido, such as masturbating. And once you recognize that this is all you need, it almost completely makes the game that we're playing completely pointless. What are we doing? Most of our desires are completely inefficient. We're not accomplishing anything. We're going to reach the same goal, and while these desires may not be satisfied as fulfilled, as much of a fulfillment as we may have satisfying them in the way that we would desire to begin with, once we're satisfied, and that's really all that matters. And what proves that it doesn't matter what you desire and how you satisfy these desires, if you satisfy these desires, is because even if a person did get the woman they want, did get the meal they want, they'd get hungry all over again. And that proves the point, that the satisfaction is all that matters. It doesn't matter what drives you. It does matter what drives you, but it's irrelevant to the point of the satisfaction that you're trying to satisfy this desire. And it doesn't matter how many women you get, your libido is going to come back, you're going to want more. The mechanism is built in. We're never built to be satisfied. We're constantly going to be searching, we're constantly chasing, we're going to constantly have some other problem that we're chasing towards and trying to solve. Otherwise, what would be the point of our survival, our living in general? What would be the point? From our perspective, we wouldn't see any point, but some people will probably have to fool themselves into seeing points. So this desire mechanism is fooling us into living long enough until we're disposable by the standards that it's created. It needs us long enough until it can find ways to dispose of us once we've satisfied its addiction, or its desire, or its built-in mechanism. And that almost proves the point. What's the point if we could just live off of these more efficient standards, like we can only live off a bowl of rice, or we live off of water every day. We don't need to go out of our way, and most of these things are inefficient, and they're probably dangerous. Drinking too much soda can be dangerous. It could cause a lot of problems, especially all these kinds of these ailments that people, especially today, have, can create problems and almost in a way force them to recognize the truth by complete recognition, by minimalistic living standards, recognizing that you can live off these minimalistic living standards. And you can live off a bowl of rice and some water, or whatever minimum standard you create, ramen noodles, or any kind of similar standard that you create every day. And you can recognize that you can live off these things, and it almost completely defeats the point of our existence. If you're just going to get by every day, you're not really much doing anything with your life. You're not satisfying the desire mechanism that life's created. Well, you're satisfying the desire, but you're satisfying it in a more efficient way, which is usually the more efficient way is the best way that you can possibly do it, because you're not taking away from someone else's ability to do the exact same thing. You're not interfering as much. And it's obviously the most efficient thing to do to minimize your standards and have a minimizing, be more easily satisfied than having all these complicated standards and these high standards to live up to when it comes to satisfying your desires. So back to the point about, obviously satisfying your desires the way you want isn't going to change anything. You're still going to be chasing, and if you weren't chasing, you wouldn't have any point in living. So no matter how many women you have, no matter how many, obviously the more you do that, obviously the more involved that you have in another sentient organism, and the more likely you're going to have more conflict and more pain and more suffering, the more you involve yourself with other people and set expectations and do things like that. And the same thing with, you don't have to eat meat. No matter what you eat, it's the matter that you're satisfying and you're full by the end that matters. And once you've satisfied your hunger, it doesn't matter what you eat. You don't have to eat meat. You can eat some rice, or you can eat some pasta, and that's just as satisfying in the end. The satisfaction that you satisfy just as much as anything that you eat, such as a meat. So these satisfactions that we are satisfying only matter to us beforehand, and once they're satisfied, they mean nothing afterwards, other than that we've satisfied these desires. And once we have no satisfaction to solve, once we have no problems, once we have no more searching, obviously life's going to find a way to give you problems, especially when you're a sentient organism. But without these problems, without these hungers, we wouldn't have anything driving us. And when we realize the most efficient standards to live by these mechanisms that we're living by, the more you'll realize just how pointless everything we're doing is. What's the point of us living on here, living on this planet at all, if all we're doing is living by the minimalistic standards, the most efficient standards that we can, especially when we're doing it for the greater good of everyone. And it's less cannibalistic, and it's doing better for everyone. And I think that's all I wanted to say. I think I've mentioned everything I need to say in this video. I think there might be a point or two that I missed, but I think that gets the point across just well enough that these desires are the motivating mechanism, and without this motivating mechanism, if we're not living by the standards itself, first of all, the standards that we have to live by, that we're living by to begin with, are completely pointless. The point is to reproduce, but we can tell that the pointlessness in reproducing is that we're going to reproduce so people can do the exact same thing. Creating a better democracy, we're just going to do it so we can satisfy these hungers all the better, but it's still all we're doing is satisfying these hungers. And every time we bring a new generation in, we're not only are we taking a risk with their welfare, we're taking a risk with them just obviously recognizing the same game that we're playing over and over again. We reproduce to have them play the game. We reproduce to have them play the game, obviously taking a risk in the meantime. Obviously the only thing that matters is the pain that we're suffering. or the suffering that we experience. And that's the only mechanism by which our satisfaction comes by, is the suffering, the tension that we live by. And once we recognize the meaninglessness of this game, even created by the internal mechanism that which we were created by, such as evolution and all these this natural selection, all sorts of things like this, and we realize that the pointlessness of this game can be satisfied with something even more pointless that lets you recognize, such as living a minimalistic lifestyle. I guess the only meaning you can get out of this is that you're going to make people's lives easier the more efficient you are and the less cannibalistic you are when you're satisfying these desires. And the desire mechanism only matters when you're the satisfaction that you get. And that's another thing that makes you realize the pointlessness of this game. Pointlessness is in the reproducing of a next generation, only for them to play the same old satisfy desire mechanism game that we're playing, and where the satisfaction is the only thing that matters. And this satisfaction can be built out of inner tensions. And I want to give another example when it comes to things that don't have to necessarily do with hunger, such as food or sex. And this satisfaction is something that can happen. Say you want to skydive or do some sort of, high adrenaline junkie daredevil kind of thing. Well, you never know. You can satisfy that desire or lose that desire completely. It's not a built-in desire that you have. You may say, I can't wait, and I've been waiting so long to do this certain specific thing, like skydiving. You can find that you can satisfy that desire or fulfill that time, especially when you realize that that you don't have that ability, that activity at your disposal. You'll realize that you can live off, that you can live off just about anything and be just as satisfied. You may say, I want to go skydiving, I want to go skydiving, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do something that has completely no point other than to satisfy some sort of tension I have, some sort of built-in desire that was created by me to begin with, such as the desire to go, some delusion that you feel like you need to be fulfilled by going skydiving, when something in the meantime at your disposal that you have, while the skydiving you don't have at your disposal, can be satisfied in any number of ways to satisfy that desire that you do have. And I think if anyone takes a look at themselves, will realize that this can be satisfied in any number of ways just as easily. And you don't need the thing that you think you need, the delusion that you think you need to satisfy your desire with. It's all a projection of this desire. You're projecting that you need to go skydiving to satisfy this built-in tension that you have, to satisfy the desire that you have built up in you. To satisfy it is all that matters. And when you're living every day, since you can't go skydiving, it's not as bad as a tension that's building up in you. And that's obviously something you have to satisfy, but when you know that you don't need that to satisfy it, it's something that becomes irrelevant once you've satisfied, at least in a comfortable state of mind, that you're not in pain, that not going skydiving is not a painful thing, that you've satisfied just enough by not being in pain, even if it's not completely satisfied, sort of like the sex thing. It doesn't matter that you are, how you reach your satisfaction, it matters how that you are satisfied in the end, and I think that's all I need to say. So even if it is something like skydiving or any number of activities, watching a movie, I wanted to see this movie, I wanted to play this game, I wanted to do this, I wanted to do that. In the meantime, you may realize when you don't have those things at your disposal, you may find something else to satisfy that desire, and when there's nothing else to satisfy that desire, it's not as bad is being in an active state of suffering. It's something being deprived of you built on a tension that you've created for yourself to begin with. And when you've created that tension for yourself to begin with, based off your own internal mechanisms working based on your previous experiences, you may realize that you can change those internal desires, or find that you can at least be satisfied with something less, and recognizing that you don't need these things to at least be comfortable on living, and you'll be just fine, even if you never experience it. So I think that's all I need to say. I do appreciate it, and till next time, bye.